The rain had turned the alley into something darker than just wet pavement. Raymond heard her before he saw her, a voice so small it almost dissolved into the storm. "Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt." She was crumpled against the brick wall, one hand raised not in defense, but in surrender. Above her stood a man whose silhouette didn't belong in this part of town. Italian leather shoes, unmarked by the filth pooling around them. A wedding band that caught the amber streetlight each time he drew back his fist. Raymond had pulled bodies from burning vehicles in Kandahar. He'd held his wife's hand as cancer hollowed her out over 18 months. But this was violence of a different breed. Deliberate, personal, the kind meant to erase, not just hurt. He moved without deciding to move, grabbed the man's collar, felt expensive fabric tear in his grip. The stranger's eyes met his for one cold second before he vanished into the rain. What Raymond didn't know, couldn't know, as he helped the trembling woman into his taxi. He'd just declared war on a man who owned judges the way other people owned furniture. The woman now bleeding onto his cracked vinyl seats was worth more than every house on his street combined. And the choice he'd made in that alley would force him to choose again, between protecting a stranger and keeping his son. Because men like that don't forgive. They recalibrate, and this one had already started. Raymond's hands were steady as he helped her into the back seat, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The woman's face was a canvas of purple and red, one eye swollen shut, lip split down the middle. She flinched when he reached for her seatbelt, and he froze, palms up, the way he'd learned to approach wounded animals. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, voice low. "Let me take you to the hospital." She shook her head violently, and the movement made her gasp, one hand clutching her ribs. "No hospital. No police. Please." Her voice cracked on the last word. Raymond studied her in the rearview mirror. Expensive coat, now torn. Manicured nails, 3 of them broken. Whoever she was, she didn't belong in this neighborhood any more than her attacker did. The engine coughed to life, and Raymond pulled away from the curb, watching the alley disappear behind them. "Where do you want to go?" he asked. The woman stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I don't know," she whispered. "I can't go home." Raymond's jaw tightened. He'd heard those words before, from women who'd climbed into his taxi at 3 in the morning with bruises they'd tried to hide under makeup. But this woman's terror ran deeper than domestic violence. This was something else. "You can't stay out here," he said. "Not like this." She met his eyes in the mirror, and for a moment, he saw past the injuries to something that made him catch his breath. Intelligence, calculation, and beneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that he recognized from his own reflection. He made a decision that would have made his sister call him crazy. "I have a spare room," Raymond said, "just for tonight, until you figure things out." The woman's good eye widened. "I don't have any money to pay you." Raymond shook his head. "I'm not asking for money." She studied him for a long moment, looking for the trap, the angle, the price that always came with help from strangers. But Raymond just kept driving, hands steady on the wheel, eyes on the road. Finally, she nodded. "Just tonight," she said. "I'll be gone in the morning." Raymond's apartment building looked worse in the rain, its brick facade stained with decades of weather and neglect. He parked in the narrow alley behind it, where his ancient Civic sat rusting next to dumpsters that never quite emptied. The woman moved slowly, each step clearly painful, and Raymond offered his arm without comment. She took it. Inside, the stairwell smelled like burnt coffee and someone's cooking, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Raymond lived on the 3rd floor, in a 2-bedroom unit that he'd managed to afford only because the landlord had known his wife. The lock stuck, as always, and he had to jiggle the key twice before the door swung open. The apartment was small but clean, the kind of place where everything had a purpose and nothing went to waste. Toys were stacked neatly in a plastic bin by the couch, dishes drained in a rack by the sink. On the fridge hung a child's drawing of 3 stick figures under a too large sun. The word family written in crooked letters across the top. The woman noticed it, something flickering across her battered face. "You have a child," she said, and it wasn't quite a question. Raymond nodded. "Oliver. He's 7. Staying with my sister tonight." He gestured toward the hallway. "Bathroom's the first door. Let me get you some supplies." He found her sitting on the closed toilet lid when he returned, staring at her reflection in the mirror above the sink. Raymond set down a first aid kit, a clean towel, and one of his old t-shirts. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything," he said, turning to leave. "Wait." Her voice stopped him. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Raymond looked at her reflection in the mirror, at the way she held herself like something broken, but refusing to shatter. "I don't need to know," he said. "I saw what was being done to you. That's enough." He left her there, closing the door softly behind him. In the kitchen, Raymond made coffee he didn't want, and tried not to think about the man in the alley. Tried not to think about the cold intelligence in those eyes. The casual way he'd drawn back his fist like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Raymond had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, had seen what men were capable of when they thought no one was watching. But there was something about tonight that sat wrong in his gut, a warning he couldn't quite name. He pulled out his phone, hesitated, then put it away. Whoever she was, whatever she was running from, it wasn't his business. He'd give her a night, maybe help her find a shelter in the morning. That was it. That was all he could afford to do. The bathroom door opened, and the woman emerged wearing his oversized shirt like a dress, her hair wet and pushed back from her face. She'd cleaned the blood away, revealing the full extent of the damage. The bruises would darken over the next few days, Raymond knew. They always did. "Thank you," she said, and the words sounded foreign in her mouth, like she wasn't used to saying them. Raymond nodded toward the spare room. Bed's made up. Door locks from the inside. She moved past him, paused in the doorway. "My name is Veronica," she said, not turning around. "Raymond," he replied. "Sleep well, Veronica." The door clicked shut, and Raymond heard the lock engage. He sat down at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold in his hands, and wondered what kind of trouble he'd just invited into his home. Morning came too fast, the kind of gray dawn that promised more rain. Raymond was already up, had been for hours, lying awake in his bed and listening to the sounds of the building settling around him. His alarm went off at 5:30, the same time it did every morning, and he silenced it before it could wake Oliver. Except Oliver wasn't here. Oliver was at his Aunt Beth's, probably still asleep in the guest room with his stuffed elephant tucked under one arm. Raymond dressed quietly, made coffee, and was frying eggs when he heard movement from the spare room. Veronica appeared in the kitchen doorway, still wearing his shirt, her hair a mess around her shoulders. In the morning light, the bruises looked worse, a technicolor map of violence across her face and arms. She moved like every breath hurt, one hand pressed to her ribs. "I'll leave after breakfast," she said. No preamble, no small talk. Raymond slid a plate across the counter. "Eat first, then we'll figure it out." She stared at the food like it might be poisoned, then sat down slowly on the stool. The first bite seemed to break something in her, and she ate with the focused intensity of someone who hadn't had a real meal in days. Raymond watched her from the corner of his eye while he pretended to be interested in his own breakfast. There was something off about the picture she made, the way she held her fork, the unconscious grace even when injured, the way her eyes never stopped moving, cataloging exits and threats. "How long were you on the street?" he asked. Veronica paused, the fork halfway to her mouth. 2 days, she said. "Maybe 3. I lost track." Raymond nodded. "And before that?" She set down the fork, met his eyes directly. "Before that, I had a different life. One I can't go back to." The weight of those words settled between them, heavy as lead. The knock on the door came before either of them could speak again. 3 sharp raps, official and impatient. Raymond felt Veronica go rigid beside him, saw her eyes dart toward the back window, like she was measuring the drop. "Stay here," he said quietly, moving toward the door. He checked the peephole, found a man in a cheap suit standing in the hallway, badge already out. Raymond's stomach tightened. He opened the door just wide enough to block the view inside. "Can I help you, officer?" The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Detective Morris. I'm looking for a woman. Might have come through this area last night. About 5'6". Brown hair, last seen near Fletcher Street." He held up a phone, showed Raymond a photo. It was Veronica, but not the Veronica currently sitting at his kitchen counter. This woman wore diamonds and a designer dress, smiled for the camera like she owned the world. "Missing person case," Morris continued. "Husband's worried sick. Says she's been having some mental health issues, not thinking clearly." Raymond kept his face neutral, the way he'd learned in interrogation resistance training. "Haven't seen her," he said. "I work nights. Just got home." Morris nodded slowly, but his eyes were sharp, taking in details. "That's a shame. See, her husband's offering a substantial reward for information. $10,000. That's a lot of money for a working man." He let the words hang there, pregnant with implication. Raymond felt something cold slide down his spine. $10,000. Whoever Veronica was, whoever was looking for her, they had resources. "Like I said," Raymond repeated, "haven't seen her." Morris pulled out a card, pressed it into Raymond's hand. "If you do, give me a call. Day or night." Her husband just wants her safe. The way he said safe made Raymond's skin crawl. Raymond closed the door, locked it, stood there for a moment with his hand on the knob. When he turned around, Veronica was standing in the hallway, her face pale beneath the bruises. "They found me already," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice, just tired resignation. "That wasn't a real cop, was it?" Raymond asked. Veronica shook her head. "Private investigator. Sterling has a dozen of them on retainer." Sterling. So now the ghost had a name. "Your husband," Raymond said, and it wasn't a question. Veronica's laugh was bitter. "Ex-husband. Or he will be, once the lawyers finish the paperwork. If I live that long." She moved to the window, careful to stay behind the curtain, and looked down at the street below. Raymond watched her, saw the way she held herself like a general surveying a battlefield. "He'll have someone watching the building now," she said. "Front and back. They'll wait for me to leave." Raymond poured himself more coffee, buying time to think. Every instinct he had was screaming at him to walk away, to give her whatever cash he had in his wallet and wish her luck. He had Oliver to think about. He had a job that barely paid the bills, and a landlord who'd kick him out if he attracted the wrong kind of attention. But then he remembered the alley, remembered the way Sterling had stood over her like she was something to be crushed beneath his shoe. Remembered the sound of her voice. "Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt." "How much trouble am I in if I keep helping you?" Raymond asked. Veronica turned from the window, and for the first time, he saw something like respect in her eyes. "More than you can imagine," she said. "Sterling doesn't forgive people who get in his way. And I'm not just his way. I'm his entire empire. The company, the assets, everything. It's all in my name. Has been since my father died." Raymond felt pieces click into place. So this isn't about love gone wrong. This is about money. Veronica smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. Love was never part of the equation. This is about control, about a man who spent 10 years positioning himself to take everything, only to discover I'd rather burn it all down than let him have it. Raymond set down his coffee cup, studied this woman who'd appeared in his life like a storm. "What did you do?" he asked. Veronica's smile widened, though it made her split lip start bleeding again. "I changed the beneficiary on my trust fund, all of it, $2 billion. Instead of passing to Sterling if something happens to me, it goes to a foundation I set up. One that helps women leave abusive marriages. That's why he was in that alley. That's why he was trying to beat me into changing it back. $2 billion. The number was so large it barely registered. Raymond had been worried about making rent. This woman had been worried about how to hide an empire. "So he's not trying to kill you," Raymond said slowly. "He's trying to control you." Veronica nodded. "He can't access the money if I'm dead. But if he can have me declared mentally incompetent, if he can get me committed, he becomes my legal guardian." And then, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Raymond could see the rest of the plan laid out like a chess game. Get her committed, take control of her assets. Then maybe, once the paperwork was sorted, a tragic accident. Pills, a fall. Something that looked like suicide. "That detective," Raymond said. "Morris. He showed me a photo of you. Said Sterling reported you missing. Said you were having mental health issues." Veronica's face went hard. "He's been laying that groundwork for months, telling friends I've been acting erratic, planting stories with people we know. All of it building a case that I'm unstable, dangerous to myself." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The thing is, I've been documenting everything. Every time he hit me, every threat, every meeting with his lawyers. I have videos, recordings, emails, enough to destroy him. I just needed time to get everything to my attorney. And Sterling figured it out before I could." Raymond's mind was racing, trying to keep up with the scope of what she was telling him. "So, where's the evidence now?" Veronica's face fell. "In a safety deposit box, one that's in a bank Sterling's family owns. I can't get to it without him knowing." They stood there in Raymond's cramped kitchen, the morning light filtering through cheap blinds, and Raymond felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He could still walk away. Tell her he was sorry, that he had his own problems, that he couldn't risk everything for someone he'd just met. It would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But Raymond had watched his wife die slowly, watched cancer eat away at her piece by piece, while he stood helpless. He'd held her hand, and promised her he'd take care of Oliver. That he'd be the kind of man who didn't walk away when things got hard. And he'd meant it, even when it hurt, even when it cost him everything. "I need to pick up my son from my sister's," Raymond said. Veronica's face shuddered. "Of course. I understand. I'll be gone before you get back." Raymond shook his head. "That's not what I meant. I need to get Oliver, and then we need to figure out how to keep both of you safe until we can get you to that safety deposit box." Veronica stared at him. "You can't be serious. These people will destroy you. They'll take your son. They'll make sure you never work again." Raymond poured the last of the coffee down the sink, rinsed the cup. "They can try," he said, "but I've been through worse." The rain had started again by the time Raymond left to get Oliver. A steady drizzle that turned the streets into mirrors. He took the long way to his sister's house, checking his mirrors more than he ever had, watching for cars that followed too closely or stayed too far back. He'd learned a lot in the military about surveillance and counter-surveillance. Most of it had seemed useless in civilian life. Now he was grateful for every boring training session he'd sat through. Beth's house was in a better neighborhood, the kind of place where kids played in front yards, and people knew their neighbors' names. His sister answered the door before he could knock, Oliver barreling past her, to wrap his arms around Raymond's waist. "Dad, Aunt Beth made pancakes, and we watched cartoons, and she said I could come back next weekend if you say it's okay." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Raymond scooped him up. Felt the solid weight of his son in his arms. This was what mattered. Everything else was just details. Beth leaned against the doorframe, studying her brother with eyes that missed nothing. "You look tired," she said. Raymond nodded. "Long night." Beth glanced at Oliver, then back at Raymond. "Everything okay?" It was the kind of question that meant she already knew the answer was no, but was giving him a chance to tell her about it. Raymond kissed the top of Oliver's head. "I'll call you later," he said. "Thanks for watching him." Back in the car, Oliver chattered about cartoons and pancakes, and the dog next door that Aunt Beth said was the size of a horse. Raymond made the appropriate noises, his mind elsewhere, calculating risks and timelines. He needed to get Veronica out of his apartment before dark. Needed to find somewhere she could hole up for a few days while they figured out the next move. Needed to do all of it without putting Oliver in danger. "Dad?" Oliver's voice cut through his thoughts. "Are we going home?" Raymond glanced in the rearview mirror, met his son's eyes. "Yeah, buddy, we're going home. But we're going to have a guest staying with us for a little while." Oliver's face lit up. "Like a sleepover?" Raymond smiled despite everything. "Something like that." They pulled up to the apartment building, and Raymond saw what he'd been looking for. A black sedan parked across the street, engine running, two shapes visible inside. Sterling's people. They weren't even trying to hide. Raymond kept driving, circled the block, came back around to the alley entrance behind the building. The alley was clear. He parked, helped Oliver out, and they took the back stairs up to the third floor. Veronica was exactly where he'd left her, standing by the window like a sentry. She turned when they entered, and her eyes went wide when she saw Oliver. "This is Oliver," Raymond said. "Ollie, this is Veronica. She's going to be staying with us for a few days." Oliver studied Veronica with the frank curiosity of a 7-year-old, taking in the bruises without flinching. "Did you get in a fight?" he asked. Veronica's mouth twitched. "Something like that." Oliver nodded solemnly. "My dad's really good at fixing things. He can help." The simple faith in those words made something crack in Veronica's careful composure. She knelt down, slow and painful, until she was at Oliver's eye level. "Thank you," she said. "That's very kind of you." Oliver beamed at her, then looked up at his father. "Can I show her my Legos?" Raymond nodded, and Oliver bounded off toward his room, already narrating his plans for the greatest Lego spaceship ever built. Veronica stood up slowly, and Raymond could see the effort it took not to wince. "He doesn't know," she said, "about what's happening." Raymond shook his head. "He knows enough. He knows you needed help." Veronica looked toward Oliver's room, where they could hear the sound of plastic bricks being sorted. "I can't stay here, not with him. It's too dangerous." Raymond had been thinking about this all morning. "I know someone, ex-military, like me. Runs a veteran support group. He might have a safe place you can stay." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Can you trust him?" Raymond thought about Marcus, about the man who'd pulled him out of the darkness after Rachel died, who'd helped him figure out how to be both mother and father to a grieving 7-year-old. "With my life," he said. They spent the rest of the morning planning in whispers while Oliver built his spaceship. Raymond made calls from his bedroom, speaking in low tones to Marcus, laying out the situation in broad strokes. Marcus didn't ask many questions. That was the thing about men who'd served together. They understood that sometimes you needed help first and explanations later. By afternoon, they had a plan. Marcus would pick up Veronica after dark, when the shift change for surveillance teams usually happened. He'd take her to a hunting cabin about 40 miles outside the city, a place that belonged to another vet, someone who owed Marcus favors. She could stay there while they figured out how to get into the bank. It wasn't perfect, but it was better than keeping her here, where Sterling's people could walk through the door anytime they wanted. The afternoon crawled by. Oliver showed Veronica his entire room, every toy, every drawing, every treasure that mattered to a 7-year-old mind. And Veronica, to her credit, paid attention. Really paid attention, asking questions and listening to the answers like they mattered. Raymond watched them from the kitchen, pretending to do dishes, and felt something twist in his chest. This woman, this stranger who'd fallen into his life, covered in bruises and fear, sitting cross-legged on his son's bedroom floor, laughing at a knock-knock joke that wasn't even remotely funny. It felt like something important, something fragile. The kind of moment that existed outside of time, untouched by the danger pressing in from all sides. But danger didn't care about moments. At 4 o'clock, Raymond's phone rang. The number was unknown, but he answered anyway, stepping into the hallway so Oliver wouldn't hear. Mr. Beckett. The voice on the other end was smooth, educated, the kind of voice that had never been told no. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Raymond's hand tightened on the phone. Who is this? A low chuckle. You know who this is. The detective gave you my card this morning. I'm just calling to clarify the situation man to man. Sterling. Raymond felt his pulse quicken, forced his voice to stay level. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't, Sterling said, and his tone suggested they were both in on the same joke. But let's pretend, just for a moment, that you found my wife last night. That you, in a misguided moment of chivalry, decided to help her. I want you to understand what that help would cost you. He paused, and Raymond heard papers rustling on the other end. Oliver Beckett, 7 years old, attends Jefferson Elementary. His teacher is Mrs. Patterson. He likes dinosaurs and building blocks. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he goes to his Aunt Beth's house after school because you work the night shift. Beth lives at 417 Maple Street. She has a dog named Chester. Oliver loves that dog. The words hit Raymond like physical blows. The casual recitation of his son's life, laid out like a threat barely contained. If you touch my son, Raymond started, but Sterling cut him off. I don't need to touch him, Mr. Beckett. I just need you to understand that I could. That I know everything about you, your service record, the fact that you're 3 months behind on rent, the fact that you barely make enough to feed that boy properly. I could help you with all of that. $10,000, just for telling me where she is. Or I could make things very difficult. I have friends in Child Protective Services. Friends who could decide that a single father working night shifts isn't providing a stable home environment. Raymond's vision went red around the edges. He'd face down insurgents with automatic weapons and men with bombs strapped to their chests. But this kind of threat, this quiet violence wrapped in expensive syllables, was worse, because it was aimed at the one thing he couldn't protect with his fists or his training. I don't respond well to threats, Raymond said quietly. Sterling's laugh was sharp. That's not a threat, Mr. Beckett. It's a promise. You have until midnight to make the right choice. After that, I stop being reasonable. The line went dead. Raymond stood in the hallway, phone still pressed to his ear, and tried to breathe through the fear clawing at his throat. He'd thought he understood what he was getting into. Thought he could keep Oliver separate from this, safe from the fallout. But Sterling had found every pressure point in his life and was preparing to push. The bedroom door opened, and Veronica stepped out, took one look at his face, and went pale. He called you, she said. It wasn't a question. Raymond nodded. He knows about Oliver, about my sister, everything. Veronica's hands clenched into fists. I'm leaving. Right now. Before he can do anything, Raymond caught her arm as she moved past him. And go where? He's got people watching the building. You won't make it 2 blocks. Then he'll have me, and you'll be safe, Veronica said, and there was something fierce in her voice. I won't let him hurt your son because of me. Raymond thought about the alley, about the sound of Sterling's fist connecting with flesh. Thought about what would happen to Veronica if she went back to him now, with her evidence still locked away and no leverage left. There's another option, he said slowly. Veronica shook her head. There's no option that doesn't end with someone getting hurt. Raymond met her eyes. Then we make sure it's the right someone. The plan was insane. Raymond knew it was insane, even as he laid it out to Veronica and Marcus, who'd arrived early, sensing through some veteran's 6th sense that things had gone sideways. But insane was all they had left. They couldn't go to the police. Sterling owned enough of them to make that useless. They couldn't run. He'd find them wherever they went. So they'd do the only thing left. They'd attack. The bank opens at 8 tomorrow morning, Raymond said, spreading a map across his kitchen table while Oliver slept in the next room. Veronica walks in first thing, gets to that safety deposit box, and we get the evidence out before Sterling realizes what's happening. Marcus, a man built like a boxer, with a face that had seen too many fights, shook his head. He'll have people watching every bank his family owns. She walks through that door, they'll know in 30 seconds. Raymond nodded. That's why she's not walking through the door alone. We are, all of us. We make it look like a normal morning. Just a guy helping his friend do some banking. Veronica leaned forward. Sterling's people know what I look like. They've been hunting me for 2 days. Raymond pulled something from his pocket, a business card for a salon 2 blocks from the bank. My sister's place. She does makeup, theater-quality stuff for plays and events. We go there first, change your look enough that you can walk past them. Then we move fast, get in and out before they realize. Marcus studied the map, his finger tracing routes. What about the kid? Raymond felt something cold settle in his stomach. Beth takes him to school. Normal morning, normal routine. Sterling's watching for changes, for panic. We give him nothing to see. Veronica's face was tight. This is too risky. If something goes wrong, Raymond cut her off. Something's already wrong. We're just choosing which direction to fall. He looked at Marcus. I need you to be backup. Stay outside. Watch for trouble. If things go south, you get Beth and Oliver out of the city. Take them to that cabin you told me about. Marcus nodded slowly. This is going to blow up in our faces. Raymond smiled without humor. Probably. But at least we'll be the ones lighting the match. They spent the rest of the night preparing. Marcus left to gather supplies. Burner phones, cash, a car that couldn't be traced to any of them. Veronica sat at the kitchen table, writing down everything she remembered about the evidence in the safety deposit box, creating a backup in case something happened to her, before they could get it out. Raymond watched her work, saw the way her hand shook slightly as she wrote, the way she kept glancing toward Oliver's room, like she was memorizing the sight of a sleeping child. You don't have to do this, she said without looking up. You could still walk away. Take Oliver and disappear. Sterling would never find you. Raymond poured them both coffee, set a cup in front of her. I spent 18 months watching my wife die, he said. Watching cancer take her piece by piece, while I couldn't do anything but hold her hand. You know what I learned? Veronica looked up, waiting. I learned that there's a difference between dying and being killed. Rachel died because cells in her body went wrong. There was no one to blame, no one to fight. But you're being killed by someone who thinks he's entitled to destroy you. And I can do something about that. He took a sip of coffee, bitter and strong. So, yeah, I have to do this. Because if I walk away now, I'm just another person who stood by and let it happen. Veronica's eyes shone with something that might have been tears. "I'm worth $2 billion, she said. "And the best thing that's happened to me in 10 years is a taxi driver who stopped in an alley." Raymond smiled. "I'm not a taxi driver. I'm a rideshare contractor. Completely different tax bracket." She laughed, and it sounded like breaking glass, sharp and a little bit broken. "When this is over," she said, "if we survive, remind me to hire you as my head of security." Raymond raised his coffee cup. "When this is over, I'm going back to driving people around and forgetting I ever heard the word billion." They drank in silence, two people standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. Morning came too quickly, the way mornings always did when you needed more time. Raymond woke Oliver at 6, made him breakfast, and tried to act like it was just another day. Oliver, perceptive in the way only children could be, sensed something off in the air. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked, pushing his cereal around the bowl. Raymond ruffled his hair. "I'm fine, buddy, just tired." Oliver studied him with serious eyes. "Is Veronica going to be okay?" The question caught Raymond off guard. "What makes you ask that?" Oliver shrugged. "She's sad, I can tell. She smiles, but it doesn't reach her eyes. That's what Aunt Beth says about people who are sad." Raymond knelt down next to his son's chair, took his small hands in his larger ones. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure she's okay. You trust me?" Oliver nodded immediately. "Always." Beth arrived at 7 to take Oliver to school. She took one look at Raymond's face and pulled him aside. "What have you gotten yourself into?" she asked quietly. Raymond shook his head. "The less you know, the better. But I need you to promise me something. If I call you today, if I tell you to take Oliver and go, you don't ask questions, you just go." Beth's face went pale. "Raymond," he gripped her shoulders, "promise me." She swallowed hard, then nodded. "I promise." Oliver came running up, backpack bouncing, and Raymond scooped him into a hug that lasted a beat too long. "I love you," he said into his son's hair, "more than anything in this world." Oliver squeezed back. "I love you too, Dad." "See you after school?" Raymond watched them walk down the stairs, heard the building door close behind them. Then he turned to find Veronica standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing one of his old hoodies and a pair of sweatpants, her face bare of makeup and her hair pulled back. She looked young and scared and determined all at once. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. "Let's go burn it all down." They left through the back entrance, moving quickly through the alley to where Marcus was waiting with an unmarked sedan. No one followed them. Either Sterling's surveillance team had missed the movement, or they were being given rope to hang themselves with. Raymond suspected the latter. Beth's salon was just opening when they arrived, his sister already inside despite having just dropped Oliver at school. She'd called in her best makeup artist, a woman named Jade who'd done effects work for local theater companies. Jade took one look at Veronica's bruises, and her mouth tightened into a thin line. "Who did this to you?" she asked. Veronica met her eyes. "Someone who's about to regret it." Jade nodded slowly. "Good. Sit down. Let's make you into someone else." For the next hour, Raymond watched as Jade worked magic with makeup and prosthetics. The bruises disappeared under layers of foundation and concealer. Veronica's bone structure changed subtly, with the addition of contour and shadow. A wig transformed her from brunette to blonde, the hair styled in a severe cut that changed the shape of her face. When Jade finally stepped back, Raymond barely recognized the woman in the chair. Gone was the battered CEO, the vulnerable woman who'd curled up in his spare room. In her place sat someone harder, colder, someone who looked like she could walk through fire and come out the other side laughing. "How do I look?" Veronica asked, and even her voice had changed, dropping to a lower register. Beth handed her a mirror. Veronica stared at her reflection for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Perfect," she said. "Let's go visit my bank." The bank Sterling's family owned was in the financial district, all glass and steel and marble floors. Raymond parked 2 blocks away, and they walked the rest of the distance, Marcus trailing behind at a distance, eyes constantly moving. Raymond could feel the weight of surveillance on them, knew somewhere in the surrounding buildings Sterling's people were watching. But they were watching for a specific woman, a specific profile. The blonde and business casual walking next to him didn't match that profile, not at first glance. They'd get maybe 10 minutes before someone looked closer, before someone made the connection. 10 minutes to get in, get the evidence, and get out. It would have to be enough. The bank lobby was mostly empty at 8:15 on a Wednesday morning. A few early risers, a couple of business people, a janitor mopping near the bathroom. Veronica walked straight to the desk, her heels clicking on marble, and asked for access to her safety deposit box. The clerk, a young man who couldn't have been more than 25, pulled up her account without comment. "ID, please," he said. Veronica handed over a driver's license. Raymond's heart hammered. The license was real, but the photo was from 5 years ago, before Sterling's systematic work to isolate and control her. The clerk glanced at it, glanced at Veronica, glanced back at the photo. For a moment, Raymond thought they were done. Then the clerk smiled. "Right this way, Ms. Ashworth." They followed him into the vault room, a windowless space lined with metal drawers of various sizes. The clerk used 2 keys to open box 314, slid the long metal container out, and set it on the table in the center of the room. "Take your time," he said, and left them alone. The moment the door closed, Veronica opened the box. Inside were 3 flash drives, a stack of papers, and a small digital recorder. She grabbed everything, shoving it into the bag Raymond had brought. "Got it," she said. "Let's go." They were halfway back across the lobby when Raymond saw him. Sterling stood near the entrance, flanked by 2 large men who had the look of people paid to hurt others. He was watching the room with calm patience, and when his eyes landed on Veronica, he smiled. Even with the disguise, even with the changed hair and makeup, he knew. Of course he knew. You didn't spend 10 years living with someone without learning to recognize them in any form. "Ms. Ashworth," Sterling called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. "Or should I say, Veronica, that's a very good disguise. Almost convinced me for a moment." The bank went quiet. Everyone turned to look. Veronica's hand tightened on the bag. "Walk away, Sterling," she said. "It's over." Sterling laughed, and it was the same laugh Raymond had heard on the phone, full of casual cruelty. "It's not over until I say, it's over." "You really thought you could steal from me? Humiliate me? I own this city, Veronica. I own the police, the judges, half the politicians. What do you have? Some pathetic white knight who drives a taxi and a bag of evidence that will never see the inside of a courtroom." He started walking toward them, his men moving to flank. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me that bag. Then you're going to come home with me. And we're going to forget this little episode ever happened. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure your new friend loses his son. I've already got calls into CPS. One word from me, and Oliver Beckett becomes a ward of the state." Raymond felt something snap inside him. He'd faced down death before, had stared into the barrel of guns and the eyes of men who wanted to kill him. But this was different. This was a threat to his son, delivered by a man in a $1,000 suit who'd never gotten his hands dirty in his life. "No," Raymond said, stepping between Sterling and Veronica. Sterling raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" Raymond smiled, and it was the smile he'd worn in Kandahar, the one that said he'd already made peace with violence. "I said no. You want to get to her, you go through me. And I promise you, that's going to be a lot harder than beating up a woman in an alley." Sterling's face darkened. You're making a mistake. Raymond shrugged. Probably. But I'm good at those. One of Sterling's men moved forward, and Raymond shifted his weight, years of combat training sliding into place. But before anyone could throw a punch, the bank doors opened. Marcus walked in, followed by 5 other men, all of them veterans. All of them with the same look Raymond wore. Behind them came Beth, holding Oliver's hand, and behind her, holding a camera, was a woman Raymond recognized from the local news. "What's going on?" Sterling demanded, but his confidence had cracked, just a little. Veronica stepped forward, pulling out her phone. "What's going on is that every word you just said was recorded, every threat, every admission of corruption, and it's currently being uploaded to 3 different news outlets and the State Attorney General's office, along with the evidence from my safety deposit box, 10 years of documentation of your abuse, your fraud, your bribes. It's all there, Sterling. Every dirty deal, every payoff, every threat. And now, everyone's going to see it." Sterling's face went from red to white. "You can't. That's..." He turned to his men. "Stop her. Get that phone." But neither of them moved, because Marcus and his friends had positioned themselves between Sterling and Veronica, and the math wasn't in Sterling's favor anymore. The reporter stepped forward, camera rolling. "Mr. Sterling Ashworth, I'm Andrea Chen from Channel 7 News. Would you like to comment on the allegations that you've been systematically abusing your wife and bribing public officials?" Sterling stared at the camera like it was a snake. "I have nothing to say." He backed toward the door, his men following. "This isn't over, Veronica. I have lawyers. I have resources. You can't win this." Veronica's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. "I already won. The moment I decided I'd rather lose everything than let you have it, I won. Enjoy the trial, Sterling. I hear orange isn't your color." Sterling fled, and the bank erupted into chaos. The reporter was firing questions. The bank manager was demanding to know what was happening. And Raymond just stood there, feeling the adrenaline drain out of him, leaving his legs shaky. Veronica turned to him, her disguise beginning to crack at the edges, real tears cutting through the makeup. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." Raymond shook his head. "Thank Marcus. And Beth. And everyone else who showed up." Oliver broke free from Beth's hand and ran to Raymond, throwing his arms around his waist. "Dad, Aunt Beth said you were being a hero." Raymond picked up his son, held him close. "Not a hero, buddy. Just a guy who couldn't walk away." The next few hours were a blur of police statements and lawyers and reporters. The evidence Veronica had gathered was damning. Recorded conversations, financial records, photographs of injuries, testimony from former employees Sterling had threatened. The State Attorney General opened an investigation within 2 hours. 3 judges recused themselves from anything involving Sterling's businesses. And by evening, Sterling Ashworth had been arrested on charges of domestic violence, witness tampering, and bribery. He'd make bail, probably, and his lawyers would drag things out for months. But the damage was done. His reputation was destroyed. His political connections were running for cover. And Veronica was free. Raymond found her on the steps outside the police station, sitting in the fading sunlight and looking exhausted. He sat down next to her, not touching, just present. "What happens now?" he asked. Veronica stared out at the traffic moving past, at the normal world full of normal people doing normal things. "Now I rebuild," she said. "I take what's left of the company, restructure it, put people in charge who actually care about something other than profit. I set up that foundation I promised, the one for women trying to leave, and I testify at Sterling's trial." She turned to look at Raymond. "What about you? What do you want?" Raymond thought about his cramped apartment, his night shifts, his son growing up too fast. Thought about the life he'd built from the ruins of the one he'd lost when Rachel died. It wasn't much, but it was his. "I want to go home," he said. "I want to put Oliver to bed and read him a story and pretend that none of this ever happened." Veronica nodded. "You could have more. You know that, right? I meant what I said about head of security. Or I could set you up with something else. Pay off your rent, get you a better place. It's the least I can do." Raymond stood up, offered her his hand. "Keep your money. Use it to help people who need it more than I do." Veronica took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. "You're a rare man, Raymond Beckett." Raymond smiled. "I'm just a guy who was in the right place at the right time. Or the wrong place, depending on how you look at it." They stood there for a moment, two people who'd been thrown together by chance and violence and had somehow made it through to the other side. Then Veronica leaned in, kissed him on the cheek. "If you ever need anything," she said, "anything at all, you call me." Raymond nodded. "Same goes for you. You need a ride somewhere. I know a guy." 6 months later, Raymond was driving his route when he got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him hit the button. "Hello?" Veronica's voice came through the speaker, warmer than he remembered. "Raymond, how are you?" He smiled despite himself. "Good. Busy. Oliver's doing well. Beth's driving me crazy trying to set me up with her friends. The usual." Veronica laughed. "I saw the news about Sterling's sentencing. 15 years. Feels like justice, doesn't it?" Raymond had watched the trial from a distance, had testified about what he saw in the alley. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours. "Feels like a start," he said. "I wanted to let you know," Veronica said. "The foundation is up and running. We've helped 43 women leave abusive situations in the last 6 months. Gave them legal support, financial assistance, safe places to stay. We're calling it the Oliver Foundation." Raymond nearly swerved into another lane. "You named it after my son?" Veronica's voice was soft. "He reminded me that kindness still exists, that there are people who help because it's the right thing to do, not because they want something in return." Seemed appropriate. Raymond felt something tight in his chest. He'd be honored. We both are. "There's something else," Veronica said. "I'm stepping down as CEO, putting someone else in charge of the day-to-day operations. I realized something over these last few months. I spent 10 years building an empire because my father wanted me to, because Sterling wanted me to, because everyone expected me to. But I never asked what I wanted." Raymond waited. "And what do you want?" Veronica laughed, and it sounded free, lighter than anything he'd heard from her before. "I want to work at the foundation. I want to talk to women who've been where I was. I want to help them find their way out. Is that crazy? Giving up billions to do social work?" Raymond thought about the alley, about the woman who'd begged not to be kicked because she was already hurt. Thought about the person she'd been and the person she'd become. "Not crazy at all," he said. "Sounds like you figured out what matters." They talked for a few more minutes about Oliver and the foundation and the new life Veronica was building from the ashes of her old one. When they finally hung up, Raymond sat in his car for a moment, watching the city move around him. His phone buzzed. A ride request, someone heading across town. He accepted it, put the car in gear, and drove. Life went on. Oliver grew another inch and lost a tooth. Beth finally stopped trying to set Raymond up with every single woman she knew. The seasons changed, winter sliding into spring, and Raymond kept driving, kept working, kept building the small, quiet life he'd chosen. And sometimes, when he passed the alley where it all started, he'd slow down, remember the sound of rain, and a voice crying out for mercy. Remember the choice he'd made to stop instead of driving past. He'd never know what would have happened if he'd kept going that night. Never know who he would have become if he'd chosen his own safety over someone else's suffering. But he knew who he was now. a man who'd looked at an impossible situation and chosen to fight anyway. A father teaching his son that sometimes the right thing was hard, but that didn't make it less right. A person who'd seen darkness and decided to be a light, even if that light was small, even if it only illuminated one corner of one alley on one rainy night. It wasn't much, but it was enough. And in the end, Raymond thought as he pulled up to collect his next passenger, enough was all anyone could really hope for. Enough courage to act, enough strength to endure, enough love to keep going when everything fell apart. The taxi door opened. Someone climbed in. And Raymond drove on into the night, carrying strangers to destinations unknown, ready for whatever came next. Because that's what heroes did. Not the ones in movies, not the ones with capes and powers, but the real ones, the everyday ones, the ones who showed up when it mattered and did what needed to be done. The ones who saved lives not with grand gestures, but with simple acts of human kindness. The ones who understood that sometimes the whole world could change because one person decided to stop, to listen, to care. And somewhere across the city, in an office filled with files of women who'd found their way out of the darkness, Veronica sat at her desk and answered another call. Another voice on the other end, scared and hurting and looking for help. And Veronica, who'd once been that voice, who'd once begged a stranger not to hurt her because she was already hurt, leaned forward and said the words she wished someone had said to her years ago. "You're safe now. We're going to help you, and you're never going to be alone again." The rain had stopped. The night was clear. And in the silence between moments, between calls and drives, and all the small movements that made up a life, two people who'd been broken found a way to be whole. Not by forgetting what happened, not by pretending the scars didn't exist, but by choosing every single day to be more than what was done to them, to be better, to be kind, to be the change they wished they'd seen when they needed it most. And that, in the end, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.